Talk to me a little bit about Clash and what it is.
Yeah, CLASH is the Center for Land Surface Hazards. This is a brand new center funded by the National Science Foundation. It's supported by a $15 million grant over 5 years. It's based at the University of Michigan, but the University of Oregon is one hub of several other hubs that we have a lot of activity happening related to that center. And basically, it's just a collection of scientists that are all focused on how surface hazards work from a science standpoint and how they affect communities and how we can do science that helps us inform communities and be better prepared for them in the future. So this is something that has really become apparent in the last couple decades with climate change and bigger storms, more water, more floods. These things that happen on the surface are causing a lot more damage. They're causing a lot more loss of life, and essentially, geologists that have worked on earthquakes and volcanoes have gotten all the love for many years. And this is finally the National Science Foundation recognizing that things that happen on the surface are actually becoming much more problematic and impactful across the globe. And so they want a group of us to learn more. And so we're building a community of scholars to work on these problems.
Speak to the rainfall that we've had in the Eugene area and kind of the combination of what could happen from local wildfires and then a little bit of rainfall. I know that's kind of like the perfect mixture for landslides. Speak to that and the work that you do. How do those coincide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So rainfall is the common denominator. So a lot of the events that we are studying are focused on when it rains a lot. And so the ground can only soak up so much water. And so it starts to run off and make floods happen. So we're focused on some flooding. But we're also, as you say, thinking about when it rains up on slopes that have been affected by fire, what does that do? Well, the fires kill trees, and so the trees have these really amazingly intricate root systems that hold the soil and the rock together. And so fire can destroy those trees and basically slowly lead to the decay of that root reinforcement. And so areas that have been burned are often more susceptible to landsliding during following storms just because of that really weakened root network. And so that process takes like several years to play out. So even though the Labor Day fires of 2020 that we've seen here just outside of Eugene, up the McKenzie River and further north in the Santiam, even though they happened 5 years ago, we are still entering a phase where there's a high risk of landsliding just because of how long it takes for those root networks to decay. And so we're still very interested to watch what happens when big storms come through. So small storms we're not as concerned about. It's really when you get intense rain that delivers rain faster than the soils can drain it out. And so those, like how intense that rain is, that's one of the questions we're interested to know better. Like when the forecasts tell us that certain rainfall events are going to happen, should we be worried? And we still don't know the answer to that question, but we're getting closer.
Speak to the person at home on their couch that are listening to this and thinks this is a waste of time, money, resources. Just talk about the importance from someone either that's not at the university studying natural hazards or someone that doesn't really care about natural disasters.
Yes, well, I can make my best attempt. I think one of the things that we try to emphasize to folks is that we live here in the Willamette Valley, and you drive to the west, you go into the Coast Ranges, you drive to the east, you go into the Cascade Ranges. Either direction you go, and even in town, we have mountains and hills, and those mountains and hills are the sources of these events of floods and landslides. So it's all around us, essentially, living here in the Willamette Valley. Anytime you go outside, these are things that are potentially worth thinking about. So if you were on the coast and these types of events happened, you might be there for a while. You also want to be concerned about personal safety and transportation and your own house, and where you live and where you spend time, especially when it's raining hard. So mostly we just want folks to be aware of where these potential sites of risk are, And when it's really raining, to maybe change your plans once in a while if it looks like you might be traveling in an area that's susceptible to these kinds of hazards. So areas in the Columbia River Gorge and even down near Roseburg have experienced fatalities in the past 10 years or so. And so we just want to do whatever we can to reduce the risk of that happening in the future.
Speak to the transition between research being done and kind of the implementation of it to real life practices
Mhm.
and kind of how the research you do shows up in the real world.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, at heart, we are nerds, right? So we do science for the sake of learning how the world works. And a lot of times that science is far ahead of what we can apply. And so it's really important as scientists that we step back and say, hey, what is the information that I have gained, that I've acquired through our work with these teams that we can start to use? And that is often really simple information, like what type of rainfall should we be concerned about? How steep of slopes do landslides tend to start on? When they do happen, where do they go? Where are the areas at risk? So these are like really simple fundamental questions that sometimes we forget we've actually learned a lot about in the last 10, 20 years in our discipline. And that grants like this are a great opportunity to communicate that better and make sure that we do take the time to take these simple fundamental results and understanding and make sure that we make it useful for communities. And so one of the other things is that no one wants a scientist showing up at your door telling them what's going to happen. So communication and working with communities to better convey that information and build trust, I think, is a big part of what we want to do. So a part of the center is like, how do we communicate with people better? And build relationships with city planners, emergency managers, people that know their communities and that have already built those lines of communication and trust. So we want to make sure we're not just talking to ourselves, and talking to folks like you is a big part of our goals too, is to make sure we get the message out as much as we can.
I'm not sure if this is outside of your jurisdiction, but do you know the actual dollar amount of um, the larger, I think it's maybe 15 million. Do you know how much of that is actually going to the University of Oregon or?
Yeah, it's about a $500,000. And so a lot of our work is focused here, but also a lot is in Alaska. And so our partners in Alaska are being funded as well. And so Southeast Alaska has experienced a lot of these types of landslides that are similar to the ones we see here in Oregon, and are really impacting communities a lot as well. And the same weather patterns happen up there. So work we do in Alaska helps us down here, and work we do down here also helps us up there. So these atmospheric rivers that we are now becoming familiar with for folks that live on the West Coast are the same weather phenomena that affect Alaska down to Baja, Mexico. The whole Pacific coast is affected by these types of storms, just like, like in the Southeast, folks from Florida and other places down there are familiar with hurricanes. We have atmospheric rivers, and it's just a different way that the atmosphere delivers moisture and intense storms. It gives us big snowfall, it gives us big rain and floods, and when they don't happen, we have dry years. So there's, we water is important for all kinds of reasons, and so the lack of atmospheric rivers is also, a concern for drought.
Last question. And it's okay if you can't answer it as well, but
Mhm.
I know a lot of people on the West Coast were in a frenzy when we got the tsunami watch. Kind of speak to the work of tsunamis and if you guys dabble in that territory or were you guys on high alert? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. The tsunami alert was a great example of how do we communicate? How do we take this knowledge and make it useful? I'm going to, pass that question mostly to my earthquake colleagues. So the Crescent Center that's based here at U of O is focused on earthquakes and tsunamis, and they did a great job informing folks about that tsunami, and making sure that the channels about tsunami risk were functioning and studying, how the actual tsunami compared to the one that they anticipated from that earthquake. So that's kind of a different space than what we do. That said, there are a particular flavor of landslides up in Alaska and other places that generate tsunamis. So if big mountains fall down into fjords or seaways, they can generate waves. And so our center is interested in exploring that as a potential risk, but that's not relevant to folks here in Oregon.